Hello and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first inaugural Talking Tech series webinar. We're really excited to kick these off. We're going to probably do these every Thursday, or one Thursday a month, with more to come after that potentially. We have some great guests that we have scheduled to join us and some great topics over the next couple of months that we're going to be talking about. This month, we're going to be talking about something incredibly topical to the group. We've had a lot of questions from customers, a lot of questions regarding what are these changes that are happening with VMware, what's going on in the VMware cycle, and just understanding how this is affecting customers with current VMware, current AWS, current Azure, on-premise infrastructure, and we're going to talk through just some of the changes as we see it today and where things are going historically, what we have seen going on in the past couple of months since the announcement, and then as well, what we're kind of hearing rumbling as time goes on. We did extract some Q&A questions from the group as you guys signed up for this webinar. I have those at the end, so we'll be reviewing some of those questions that were submitted by peers. Myself, Chris Bomber, the Solutions Architect and Director of Technology for Avail, is on this today, but as well, I want to introduce a partner of ours that we work fondly with, Kobe Phillips. He is the VP of Advanced Solutions for Telarus. So Kobe, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself as you guys saw the profiles in the webinar invitation. But yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. So VP of Advanced Solutions Cloud and Managed Services, really what I focus in is my swim lane. Telarus is, of course, a distributor that works closely with Avail, helping support with alignment and resources for end users and organizations. I'm excited to be here to talk about the VMware and Broadcom impact that acquisition's made, not only on I'm sure we'll get into a lot of the virtualization conversation, Chris, but also just the ripple effects that it's having and some of the other stuff that it could affect going forward, Velo, Carbon Black, et cetera. So a lot to unpack here, and I'm excited to join and chat through it all.
Definitely. Well, I think, to set everybody's expectations, I don't know that we'll get through everything this hour. I think we're going to have a secondary conversation next week with some providers about how specifically their solutions can revolve around the changes with VMware. But today we're going to kind of speak high level about what we're seeing with the VMware changes, what's occurred, what's not occurring, level set, stage set as to where we are and where we're going. So I guess we'll get right into it. As everybody knows, Broadcom acquired VMware, and there were some adjustments, mostly around pricing, to the way that this was all handled. So I guess let's get into, Kobe, the whole Pinnacle versus Premier partnership, how that looks, what we've heard about that. I know some of the people on this call might have heard those statements being thrown around. There was a whole statement of top 12 organizations were getting these Pinnacle partnerships, and about half a dozen of them were going to be distributors, and about half a dozen of them were going to be these kind of cloud solution partners. And initially, I think there was some conversation that all 12 of them would be able to sell on-premise licensing. I think that was pulled back, and then there was some conversations around pricing being different for Premier versus Pinnacle. I think that was pulled back as well. So let's kind of have a conversation around kind of what's led up to this point.
Yeah. So we'll take it from a couple of different points of view. So the partner program that VMware had was around 4,500 total. They sliced that down somewhere, and the number fluctuates a little bit because they keep letting some people in a little bit more, between 400 to 500 partners. So a significant decrease in the amount of partnerships that VMware has directly. Between that, they created a couple of levels, Pinnacle and Premier. And all the things that you laid out are accurate. When they first rolled out, Pinnacles, which are the top 100, with about 12 of those being domestic, had significant pricing. The thought thought was that they're going to have significant pricing advantages and support and so on and so forth. As everything has started to settle, the pricing isn't really significant. In fact, it's really insignificant on the pricing discounts and everything. Really, the biggest differentiator is the Pinnacles have direct access to VMware support. The Premiers will go through a distributor and alignment partnership with like an Insight or an Ingram or someone along those lines that have been validated and awarded that status by VMware as far as that goes. So those the 300 or 400 that fall into that bucket. Really what it comes down to from an end user point of view is it's a little bit insignificant, because the other major components for Pinnacle is the ability to white label some of those 4,000 plus MSPs and help them get licenses and things like that. As you said, those were split a little bit between distributors and cloud service providers, and that is still being a little bit unraveled, or not unraveled, but revealed on how that exactly works. There's still a little bit of mystery behind that, and it's all kind of word of mouth. Like, I'll talk to 6 or 7 suppliers and I'll get 6 or 7 different viewpoints and answers on what the partnership with VMware looks like from their point of view. So it's a little bit of a uniqueness. What comes out of that, though, whether it be Pinnacle or Premier, have really been the packages and the models that they put together for end user clients. How they're helping absorb some of the cost increase. Some of them have bridge models where they can help you go from on-prem onto their infrastructure, so on and so forth. I know you've got a great lineup next week, and they'll get into some of their details of that. But from a high level, it's really been more about how they've taken the information and created their own processes and policies around the relationship that they now have with VMware. But from a pricing and end user support, there's really not a huge line. And if you got to think about it, these Premier partners not being able to get directly to VMware, I don't know how much of I wouldn't even say that was a disadvantage, because they have their own tier 1, tier 2 support. The companies that they're going to be aligned to have additional expertise in it. So I don't know that there's a significant advantage in Pinnacle and Premier. There's some partnership advantages with MDF and things like that VMware supports Pinnacle with, but from an end user and support and solution set, it's not significant from everything that I've seen.
Kobe, as you touched on the MSP area, are you seeing an impact with MSPs that weren't mentioned? So a customer has an MSP provider today. They were not part of that list. How do you see those customers being affected? Specifically, with my history with MSP, the way that at previous MSPs we procured licensing, we were procuring probably from some of those lists that those organizations that didn't make the cut. And so I think what I had seen recently is kind of this double upcharge, if you would, upcharge being passed on and then another markup being passed on by MSPs. Have you seen that? What are you seeing on these MSPs, that kind of the smaller MSPs, the local regional MSPs that didn't make that cut for resell?
Yeah, so like, even if you're saying the ones that didn't make even the Premier list, right? So
yeah,
it's just become a tiered ladder system, if you think about it, from cost and support. So, here's your charge, and then there's a little bit of margin put on it here. So the company that's passing it through makes a little bit of money, and then a little bit of margin, a little bit of margin. So you get a little bit, I see, as you said, double charge, or I call it margin stacking, to stay profitable in the support, or they start to shift it over to another platform if they can. There's a lot of MSPs that have all of a sudden become partners with Nutanix or exploring more in Hyper-V, and so they've had to navigate the same as end users are looking at it if they've gotten frustrated by some changes in the business model that Broadcom and VMware have gone to market with. From the support structure, again, now you're just 2 or 3 tiers down if there's a deep level of expertise needed, and it hurts their offering slightly, if not significantly, depending on the situation, from a pricing and support model. It's not to say that it's still not a relevant offering, and I don't want to go beat up a bunch of smaller regional MSPs, because I still think that they can do a good job, but it definitely put a hurt on them. I mean, if you go from having direct access and being able to buy something for $1, and now you got to buy that same product, but now you're buying it at $1.40, and you're only charging $2, your margin obviously gets squeezed quite a bit, and that can have a pretty significant impact on the services and everything that you're able to provide, because resources and everything else become a little bit more scarce as your ability to budget and pay for those. This wasn't something that they gave a lot of people a heads up on either, right? That's the other part that's a little frustrating is the enterprise organizations, all the ones that I've engaged with, their VMware reps, got ahead of it, and they're like, hey, there's going to be some big changes coming. Sign this renewal now, and that way you don't have to deal with it for 2 to 3 years. But not everybody got that, and including these MSPs. Like that was one of the more harsh parts of this entire thing, is how a lot of the partners got cut, and were we going to make it? Are we not going to make it? And it was a pretty significant ripple effect throughout the technology community.
Yeah, I mean, so let's kind of talk about that. You had touched on how some MSPs are kind of re-architecting outside of the VMware platform, but let's just kind of touch on the big change with VMware and the Broadcom acquisition, which is the change in the architecture on pricing and the way that it's being architected. So historically, it was a memory-based model. Now we're going to a CPU-based model. And that's had some profound effect.
Yeah, I mean, essentially metered RAM to cores and hosts, right? And regardless if it's MSP or if it's end user, or if it's an organization, I call them end user organizations, where they're the ones absorbing the technology themselves and deploying it into their environment. It's affecting everybody, and there's little landmines that can trip you up. There's going to be significant changes because a lot of people have invested in hardware. Think about this. A lot of companies went and invested in hardware that optimized RAM to help, control this environment. And Chris, this is more, your area of expertise on how you would architect and align to that versus cores and hosts. And so really it's coming down to, okay, now that all of this is starting to settle out and we have all the information, it's forcing organizations to go back and look and go, okay, how do we optimize to this new environment? And it's frustrating. There's a lot of emotion behind it because you're having a vendor of yours dictate and impact your project roadmaps and your timelines and all this other stuff. Because in order to do all of that, you got to press pause on these projects to go and put the resources and time into these other project, or this project that you thought was already baked. I mean, people have had their VM situation set up now most of the time for quite some time. Now they have to go back and address it. So let's pause on an AI project, or pause on a modernization project or optimization project over here, because we have to go back over here. What I'm also seeing is a lot of organizations are frustrated. So they're looking at alternatives, of course, to VMware. But if you're pretty invested, now they're looking at, okay, how do I optimize? What's my manpower that I have to utilize to do that? And all the resources that we have to put on it. And while I'm doing that, either way, if I'm looking to migrate or optimize, let's look at everything else too. Let's look at storage. Let's look at our infrastructure as a whole. How are we going to market? And it's triggering some things that I wasn't expecting when all this happened, where they're looking at their entire stack. And so there's a lot of things where people are kind of going, I don't like this. I don't like that I'm having to do it, but while I'm doing it, let's make the most of it.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you, Kobe. We've seen a lot of customers who are now rethinking the way their current environment is configured, and are they making the most out of it? Is it the most economical to continue to have that on-premise file server? Is it economical to continue to maintain that LOB, line of business application, on-premise when there's a SaaS solution? And previously it was looked at as, that going to that SaaS solution was X amount of dollars more per month, and we already had the hardware to run it, and why bother? And I think now we're seeing a big switch in that, and a big switch in even looking at the cloud in general, and what workloads can go where and what workloads can be optimized. And I really think this is kind of a reinvigoration of cloud optimization and workload optimization, not just around, I mean, at the large scale level, some of the larger customers that we have, we're seeing that re-optimization at the level of making the most out of that licensing. So saying we went from a memory model to a CPU model, how do we make that work? And how do we optimize around that? Because we were previously optimized for the memory model. But at, I think, the SMB and mid-market level, we're seeing an optimization around, do we really need to maintain this on site? Does it really need to, does it need to be a full-blown hypervisor, full-blown server running these services, or can we move this to a SaaS product, and see an offset in cost?
Yeah, and do we want to keep managing our own hardware, right? And if as we're looking at options, and do we want to migrate it onto somebody else's infrastructure and let them manage it and do it as a service? I see more and more of those conversations now than I have in the past couple of years. Again, triggered by this. And just when you think, hey, we'll move some of this stuff to AWS. Then the latest, like one of the latest ripple effects, right? Where that partnership is certainly not as strong as it once was. And there's some nuance to that as well. But I mean, Chris, you and I talked yesterday in kind of preparation for this, and I shared with you a story about getting a couple different organizations after going through some exercises that we're going to place this in VMC, and we're going to have their VMware instances live there. And then a couple of days later, all of the stuff started to emerge, and I was like, well, it looks like bare metal as or potential new fit in one of our other offerings. But it's there's a lot of things, and I think that's the frustrating part of this. It seems like there's another small tweak or change that comes out every couple of days, and so it's hard for everyone to get their footing and know exactly which path they want to go down.
So I mean, one of the things that I've definitely heard from some of our SMB mid-market customers is really the reality on the pricing. So let's kind of talk about that. I mean, the reality on the situation, I think is, for anybody that is unaware of how this got optimized, if you're a customer that's utilizing, I would say, a bulk of the feature set that was offered by VMware, so vSAN, vCloud orchestration, those types of, I would say, more complex feature sets, those customers seem to be benefiting from the consolidation of the SKUs. The customers that I've seen most affected by the increase is the customers that really were basically getting a hypervisor with support. So moving from that ESXi kind of infrastructure. We've seen numbers between 10% increase, and then I've seen stuff as high as 200 to 300% increase. What are you seeing, Kobe, around some of your customers in terms of kind of real costs? So that, I think there's a lot of fear in, I'm just going to get a big bill, and I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know what that's going to look like. So what are the real numbers? And then kind of to piggyback off of those real numbers, a lot of conversations we have are around, is this going to be a people tax or a software tax? You're going to pay it either way. It's either I'm going to pay for it in the additional licensing costs, or the people that are going to dig their heels in and say, you know what, we're going to move to a new platform. We're going to take a review, and we're going to reassign, and we're going to pivot and place things in the cloud, and we're going to utilize SaaS software. That's still got a cost to migrate. That's still got a cost to move. So we're seeing the spend is happening. It's just, where do you want to make the spend?
Yeah, I'm to give you an answer. It's probably not going to be as pinpointed as you'd like, but I'm seeing all of the things that you just laid out, actually. And to go back to the price increase question, 10% to, I think the one that I heard that stuck out the most was 800% increase. There's a lot of, like, what I refer to as landmines that have to be tripped to get to that increase. But to your point, if you look at what Broadcom's done from a business point of view, they, I believe 80% of their, or 70% of their customer, the product was in one or two products. So they've taken all of these other business units and products that they have in that environment and put them into the bundle. So they're looking at it, to your point, the ones that are utilizing multiple products in alignment aren't seeing a huge hit, hit on the head. In fact, some might be benefiting. I think from Broadcom's point of view, they want to diversify and spread out what their products mix is within their organization, within organizations utilizing it. And so you see these bundles bundles and you say where they can go, hey, you're utilizing these products with other vendors, quit paying them and utilize our products and migrate over. And for organizations that are willing to do that, their overall could be even a cost savings to increase, on the overall value. For the ones that aren't, what you're seeing again is they haven't had time, or they haven't been able to go in and optimize to the new environment, going from the RAM to the cores and all the nuances that go in between that, and really re-looking at their own stack and how they're going to market. As far as the people tax part, yeah, resources and alignment and knowledge and awareness of things. If you think about it, it takes time to unpack it all, especially if you're going out and you're trying to source it and figure it out on your own. I have seen a significant amount of people jump over to, Nutanix, Hyper-V, Citrix, and some other type of platforms as well, just to avoid all of it. They're frustrated. They're like, again, I call it an emotional response. Oftentimes it's just, hey, we didn't do a ton of business. We didn't do a lot with VMware, so this isn't that big of a lift for us. Let's just go over here and we'll move forward with this. It's the ones that are pretty pot committed or significantly there that they're going to have to look at it. Is it, what's the migration plan look like? What's the cost look like? How long will it take? What other things? And it's the force multiplier of all this. What else am I going to have to pause to not move forward to go and address this? And again, that's the part where it's the analogy I always use is like you're remodeling a house. I have my kitchen done, and I'm going to move on to other parts of the house, and we're going to do that. And then a pipe burst in the kitchen, and you got to rip up the floor. And you're like, okay, well, if the floor is already up, did I really like that backsplash? Did I really like those countertops? And maybe I just rip it all out and redo it all over again. And if I'm concentrating on that, then none of the other progress is being made on the rest of the house. And so you look at the force multiplier. So that people tax, it's really also, I wouldn't call it tech, not necessarily tech debt, but it is progress debt, and all these other things, because you're having to go back and address this. So organizationally, I think you're seeing a lot of evaluation and waiting a little bit to see how everything shakes out. But there are the horror stories. I've seen it firsthand where there's a couple 100% increase. Again, it was around the architecture of the disaster recovery. Like the disaster recovery environment has that landscape significantly changed as well, because you have, used to spin up as much as you want. You're gonna pay for what you use. Well, now if you spin it up, you're paying for it. And so you can't really have almost an active disaster recovery plan. You've got to look at some other alternatives there. So we see a lot of organizations doing that as well.
Yeah, and so I know you spoke a little bit about some of those alternatives, but I think we've heard mention of Hyper-V, which I don't know if anybody's familiar. That's kind of been renamed as Azure Stack moving forward, and there's, as the name implies, there is some inherent integration with an Azure environment and seamless migration between the two and moving back and forth. And then obviously Citrix, we've seen an influx of, especially with a vendor that some people in this call may be familiar with, RapidScale. They're definitely having a conversation around migrating customers from the VMware environment to a Citrix environment. You mentioned Nutanix. I don't know what your feeling is on Nutanix, Kobe. I've seen some customers at work, but the workloads have to make sense for Nutanix. That's a little more nuanced than I think any of the other solutions. There's been a lot of big mention of Proxmox, which is kind of a semi-open source. They do have a support model. And then things like Linux KVM, and there's been conversations about Red Hat moving Linux KVM underneath the Red Hat environment so that enterprise support can be available for Linux KVM. Any other input that you have on kind of those alternatives that people are reviewing and looking at?
We'll use Nutanix. Like to your point, when it makes sense, it works great. And when it doesn't, and you're just jumping in, it's like any other piece of technology, especially in cloud and the infrastructure piece. Everything's going to be unique to the end user's environment. And so really taking the time and putting together a process of evaluation on what do we need to look like? What do our workloads look like? And what does it ultimately need to function as? It seems simple, but sometimes we can get away from simple and we just jump into something. But what I would say more than anything else is, Chris, with your team and like, there's a lot of options out there that can be evaluated and put into an organization, and it really just matters of like the details really matter a lot in this space. So which ones make the most sense? And you mentioned Proxmox. Do you have the staff to run that internally on your own? Like I wouldn't say it's unsupported, but it's definitely more of a choose your own adventure than a product. It's a platform than a product. And so like, how does that necessarily align to your organization and how it works? And it all comes down to a couple of things. Do you have the right skill set and resource, period, no matter what we're talking about in this space? And that's an evaluation that organizations have to make. Or do you need to have like a hybrid IT management approach? Do you need to bring in specialists? You mentioned RapidScale, there's Expedient, others that do a really great job in a lot of these conversations that can help expand what your core internal teams can do, collaborate together, and then get your organization put into a better spot. Not only for this, but I believe that's a really good approach holistically when you come to how we're building out our IT organizations, because of the skill set and resource like constraints that we have in technology. You throw in cybersecurity and all that kind of stuff, and it even gets worse. But with all of this happening, this disruption, it's causing evaluation. And if you start to feel like you're getting overwhelmed, then lean on resources that you have at your disposal to come in and help explore the different landscapes that you could go into.
Yeah, and I know I'm seeing some names in today's meeting that we've had some conversations as an organization with, and evaluated some other options, looking at those workloads, reviewing. I guess so. I think one thing to touch on, people get really caught up in, we're going to move to another platform. What is your conversations, or what have you seen with from the vendor side of things? What have you seen around the conversations of, let's not move the platform, stay within that VMware environment, but let's move to one of the big cloud host providers and so rather than optimize for a new product, let's just optimize for putting it in the cloud. Are you seeing, I know we're seeing a lot more of that evaluation with companies like 1111 and RapidScale, Expedient, Rackspace,
TierPoint, et cetera. There's, and like, we could sit here and probably name off 15 other ones, right? There's so many options out there, whether that be helping them migrate into AWS or Azure. And we'll get into some potentially just more fun viewpoints on that in just a second, on the relationship between Broadcom, AWS, Microsoft, and then NVIDIA, and like all of that landscape. That's just really more fun to talk about and look at, but we'll circle back to that in just a second. You also see a lot of these organizations that offer their own infrastructure or private clouds that can make much more financial sense management of and help and support. If they do want to move it into a hyperscaler, though, then they have teams and support to help do that as well. And so it's really, again, what's the best fit, both financially, but more importantly, operationally, to give the end users the right experience that you're hoping to give them as an organization, and to make sure that you're covered and you think through like the DR capabilities and fallout and everything else that needs to come along with any kind of technology plan. So I think we named off 5 or 6. Again, I think we could add another 15 in there of companies that can come in and have these conversations. And whether that be moving again into a hyperscaler or moving into a private cloud, or creating a hybrid environment and containerizing stuff and really just making this a little bit of a different type of conversation. And as you're going through this evaluation, why not look to maybe modernize your environment to where this isn't even as impacting in the future as it could be. And so there's a lot of those plans that are being laid out. Some are 18 to 24 months down the road with an immediate action item now to get them out of the, onto the different infrastructure or platform for support. So again, a little bit of a details matter, as everything is in technology. And with your engineering background, I'm sure you can appreciate that answer of like, well, it matters on the specific details of the situation.
Yeah, so I mean, one of those things that you touched on and that we've seen with some customers, there's definitely some relationship rattling in terms of VMware on AWS. You seem to have a little bit more knowledge around that with some stuff that you recently found out about yesterday. Do you want to talk
Yeah,
about how that kind of comes into play here?
it was just pointed out by somebody I was in a conversation with. It was who wishes to remain anonymous for obvious reasons. But because it's really, I wouldn't call it a theory. It's just more of something that they pointed out to with the relationship between Broadcom and NVIDIA, and then the effects that that's having. Think about what we just talked about. Azure Stack. That's a competitive product to VMware. And all of a sudden, you want us to also, but then you want us to put it on your infrastructure in your environment and run it in Azure, but that puts us at risk. So, and then really, what is everybody after right now, and a lot of the development and everything else? It's that GPU conversation and who controls that more than anything else. And how can we get it? How can we get VMware running off of those GPUs versus the GPUs from AWS and Azure? And I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's going to be drawn and conclusions that are being drawn, but when you start to see the ripple effects of some of the relationship coming out, I mean, AWS and that relationship was so rock solid, VMC on AWS and all of those things that were happening there. And now to just, I'm still waiting on official announcements and things like that, but to see the ripple effects and then some of the stuff that's coming out, causing a lot of pause on organizations, investing that. And oh, by the way, all of a sudden AWS just had a whole bunch of new product launches or re-emphasis on some of their products that could compete in this space as well. So it's just really alignment and relationships. I believe the CEOs of Broadcom and NVIDIA are very close. And, at the end of the day, business is business, especially when it comes to Broadcom CEO. But relationships do matter, and some are more advantageous to them than others. So a bit of I wouldn't call it a conspiracy theory, but just more of an observation that was pointed out to me. And then as I dug into it, seemed to make a lot of sense. So just another angle and another kind of way to look at some of these things that are happening.
So I know we've talked about the hypervisor platform of VMware and like it's the only product that they have, but there's certainly a whole slew of other products that VMware was offering in terms of their remote desktop platform, AirWatch, or their enterprise mobility management. I think that it got renamed to obviously VeloCloud, which is a big SD-WAN product that many people are utilizing. Carbon Black. What are you seeing with the other logos in this situation? I think we are very aware that basically the RDS or the virtualized desktop environment for Hyper-V, or I'm sorry, VMware, that got moved off to a PE company, not even a technology PE company, but just a standard PE firm. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty around that. I've heard VeloCloud is pretty business as normal with some changes in who's selling and who's part of that partner program. I've basically heard very minimal about Carbon Black other than it potentially is not long for the world. So,
well, I mean,
what do you
to be fair,
seeing?
we haven't seen much investment in Carbon Black since VMware bought it way back when, right? So,
Fair.
Kind of BAU on that product as well. VeloCloud, it looks like they went through the same round of like partnerships, and I'm waiting on the final details. I've spoken to a number of suppliers that support Velo and have made the partnership program. And again, it's just more support and alignment and what are you going to be able to offer? And it's going to have the same type of impact that the other partnership programs with the reduction that I believe they're down to about 40 globally, I want to say, but again, don't hold me too accountable to that. But ultimately, very much BAU, business as usual in that environment from everything. They're still waiting for a lot of the details on like product development and if there's going to be tweaks and things like that to come out. And I don't think you're asking me to project what I think will happen with these products, but Velo is the one that sticks out the most where it doesn't seem to fit into much of anything else. It's a little bit like, this doesn't look like the others, but I haven't seen or heard anything that would make me think that there's going to be any immediate action of spinning that off like they did with VMware Horizon. VMware Horizon was an interesting, sell, and who acquired them was even more interesting. I think there's still a pretty good alignment of partnership from a technology standpoint, but I've seen more customers move off of VMware Horizon in the last 3 or 4 months. I think it was announced in November, finalized in January, February, somewhere in that time frame. And there has been no shortage of movement and migration onto Microsoft's product or to Citrix again. So they seem to be the beneficiaries of a lot of these changes in a couple of different ways. And so I will continue to expect that to be the case, because I don't think a lot of people understand or know what the roadmap of that product is, especially with the PE firm that acquired it.
Okay. So, I mean, I think in summation of kind of the hypervisor side of things, I think it's safe to just say that we're kind of in a position where it's either going to be a software tax or a people tax. Ultimately, we're going to get some sort of price. Yeah, we're going to get some sort of price increase, whether that's in projects to migrate these items, optimize these items, move these workloads, whether it's new infrastructure to run these workloads, whether it's migration to the cloud. I guess from that perspective, we've talked about some of those kind of just high level. What are those paths that you're seeing out of VMware? Kind of dog your top 3 paths that you're seeing customers go if they want to get out of VMware. I know we've talked about migration to either a hyperscaler or a private cloud provider. The hyperscaler has been kind of iffy if you don't want to change platforms with everything that's just kind of happened with AWS. But I know that was a pathway prior. I know we've seen on-premise conversations around Azure Stack. Any other ones that you can think of?
Not off the top of my head, no. I think you hit them. It's the on-prem ones are really the ones that I believe that I see the least amount of, because that means that organizations are taking it on themselves and they're not bringing in resources to help with evaluation and things like that. So I don't have as much insight to that. But the ones that are bringing in resources to help evaluate, we see a lot more migration onto private cloud infrastructure than I was expecting to see, because of some stability and what that's allowed, like companies that we route a lot before, Expedient, TierPoint, Rapscale, others, when they're putting on their infrastructure, they have more control over cost and margin, so they can absorb and help take on some of that cost increase in the licensing and help offset it with some of the other components within that billing platform. When they're utilizing a hyperscaler, that's not a margin rich environment. There's hardly any margin there for the CSPs to do other than to stack on top of. So they're either pulling it through at straight cost, and it's not as advantageous for them or for the end user in that case, because everybody's in business. There's got to be some margin made. If a client is doing it on their own and not utilizing an MSP or CSP to help with some of these alignments, going into a hyperscaler can make a lot of sense. They're going to take it on their internal teams, and then it just becomes a little bit more of like a people tax. And are you able to do it, optimize to the new environment, and re-platform at the same time, right? And that's a little bit of a lift for a lot of organizations. It can be a big lift for them if they don't have the teams to then take on that burden. And then with the ongoing turbulence between we'll pick on AWS and Broadcom, it's also one of those that's giving some organizations pause if that's even the route they want to go. And so awareness and alignment are 2 of the key ways that we're seeing this in the evaluation process. What are my options? What makes the most sense to me? What programs are out there to help? Like, if I want to go from on-prem to a cloud, but I need some time to do it, is there bridge models that I can utilize? Or there some steps that I can take? Is there somebody that can come and help expedite that process and do it on my behalf and at a low to no cost? And these are all answers that you'll get as you get into your evaluation process and find which suppliers are the vendors that are the best fit for you. Again, I'm excited to tune in to your next one, and I'm not trying to give you a plug, but you got a pretty action-packed lineup with a lot of different viewpoints. and a lot of different options that are going to be coming to the table on how they can help support end users. So it'll be a really good conversation that I'll be joining into as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So as Kobe said, I mean, stay tuned next week. We're going to have, I believe it's 6 or 7 of those private and public hyperscaler cloud providers that are talking about how they're doing bridge licensing, how they're migrating these workloads to those cloud environments, how they're optimizing those workloads, what can be moved to a SASE product versus what needs to remain as server. But with all of this, one thing I would say is, please talk to your trusted advisor from Avail, talk to myself. We can help start to review how you can optimize those on-site workloads, how we can look at cloud providers to move these items if that's the route that you want to take. We have certainly looked at and been very creative with multiple customers and helped them kind of weather this VMware change, whether that is on the hypervisor side with some. There's been a couple of Velo customers that we've helped through the process with everything changing as well. So, please reach out to us. We're here to provide that consultative approach to finding the best solution for you, finding what works for your organization, and balancing that people and software tax, if you would, with these changes in VMware.
Well, and to Chris, to add to that, the other part is, if you look at this as part of a bigger project, I know we're about midway through the year, we're coming up in the end of May here. A lot of organizations, this doesn't have to be a right now conversation, right? There's some, it depends on your cycle and when your renewal periods are coming up. But as you go into, budgeting season and things like that, and the IT leaders on the call, there's other areas too. Like if you're expecting a cost increase, what I love about Avail is the ability to not just look at this one siloed conversation, but the bigger, broader scope of that ecosystem, whether that be network optimization through application optimization, alignment, so on and so forth, and really take a look and go, how can we look at your broader environment to maybe help offset this and do some optimization across your entire stack of technology. And I don't want to short you guys, because I think you're amazing at doing all of those things, as well as, focal pointing on this one conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think there's a lot of conversation around some of those other optimizations. I mean, there's fear of removing on-premise equipment and going to the cloud because of those network optimization aspects, or connectivity speeds, or connectivity availability. All of those things all come into play here. So as you stated, it is a much deeper conversation. It's a deeper conversation around products that customers may have in place today that they're not utilizing the full use case for, that could be optimized to take away some of the server infrastructure that they have. So
and it's not sexy.
Agree.
Yeah, and Chris, it's not sexy, but we can always look at, one of the areas that I've been seeing the most cost optimization across the board now is data storage, right? Like just simple things like that. That's, again, it's the time and effort to go look into it and figure it out, and go through that. So I think that you guys do a tremendous job and have that really broad ecosystem of resources and support to come in and plug in where you need them to as well. So,
well, I know we're kind of getting to the end of the time here. We did have some Q&A questions come in as part of the registration process, and I would also open it up to everybody on the webinar today. I know Sarah posted in the Q&A section of the webinar, but if you have any Q&A that you'd like to ask, please drop that in. We'll try to get to that with the last 15 minutes that we have left here. But I'll swap to this Q&A slide that we have, and we have 2 questions that came in as part of the initial registration process. So the first one is, do you know if VMware plans to move away from small to medium-sized business market? If so, what alternatives exist aside from Hyper-V? I think we kind of touched on this as part of the conversation today. I don't know that their true intent is to alienate the SMB market. It certainly, there are some things that tend to skew that way, and I think we had a conversation, Kobe, and the reality on the situation is for the large Fortune 500 companies, the VMware increase is a rounding error. For the smaller organizations, those are the ones that we really are seeing have to weather this storm in a manner that's a lot different. So, while it doesn't feel advantageous to the SMB, I don't know that it isn't.
I mean,
but
I could definitely see that being how I would feel if I was a leader in one of those, market segments, because when you hear that Broadcom is expecting or willing to absorb a 30% loss through these changes, that's been publicly stated, that they're like, okay, we're comfortable with 30% loss. And then it makes you kind of go, well, you're also stating that you want to grow your EBITDA from like 4 billion to 8 billion. Where does that come from? And of course, they're going to focus on that larger mid-market to large enterprise section of the world, because that's where if you think about it, that's who's the most invested in it. And again, it's a rounding error and they can absorb it, and they have the internal teams to then shift and optimize to it. So this is the most impacting to small and medium-sized business. I don't know that they're saying we don't want that business, but I think they're willing to put it at risk more. And it, again, because of the ability to shift and to move it, and the lack of programs. It's almost the same way. I compare this move to a lot of what Oracle's done to organizations over the time, where they're like, hey, we're making a change and you either got to change with us, and you're so invested into the partnership with us as far as utilizing our products that you kind of got to do it. But they even give a longer roadmap. They usually give a 4 to 5 year roadmap on most of their big changes. So I would say I could understand that point of view. But they haven't publicly stated that directly, but I mean, I could definitely see where I would feel that way if I was in that position.
Yeah, and then the second portion of that question was alternatives to Hyper-V, and then the next question is very similar. I think, unfortunately, as much as I think everybody would love to have here's a direct one-for-one replacement, and if you were on VMware today, you can just go to insert product name here, and it'll be a perfect one-to-one migration. I think it's more subtle than that. I think, both of these questions kind of dovetail into what I had said earlier. Talk with Avail. We can have conversations around what those workloads look like, what we can do with them. Does it make sense to maybe perform digital transformation on them and bring them to the cloud? Can we optimize and utilize software that you have in place, SaaS services that you have in place to replace on-premise infrastructure? But both of these questions are around like alternative hypervisors and things of that nature. And I know we've talked at great lengths at this point. We've mentioned Nutanix, we've mentioned Proxmox, we've mentioned Hyper-V / Azure Stack.
Yeah. And I've seen like a lot, and sorry to cut you off, Chris, to add to that, there's a lot of companies that have their own hypervisor, that they built out. I can think of Steel Dome and a couple others that have moved a lot of customers over to their own platforms as well. That, again, it's just what is the best fit for that organization, what makes the most sense.
Yeah, I totally agreed. I think just in general, let's have a conversation, and we can kind of help with the direction for you guys as an organization. It's very nuanced. So just saying here's a one-for-one replacement is a bit difficult. It's not on the Q&A, but I have one for you, Kobe. How are you seeing this affect kind of the backup market, the Veeams of the world, the Acronis's of the world? Kind of, there's a lot of integration that's deeply rooted in VMware KPI or APIs that has provided a lot of backup and disaster recovery functionality, even with Zerto as well. You see any?
I've seen a lot of development. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Veeam's big, their big show, if you will, is week after next. I know that there's a lot of announcements that are supposed to be coming out. They made a lot of improvements to their DR strategy. They're also doing some stuff, even disrupting to their own partnerships. Everybody's changing, right? And they're like, hey, if one of us does it, if we all do it at the same time, then we don't look like the bad guys. But I'm waiting to see the ripple effects. What I've seen is organizations that were doing it themselves have now went in. I've seen a lot of increase in what's the word I'm looking for here? Not attention, but interest in Veeam and Zerto and others to come in and look at how to do it, whether it's Cohesity, Veeam, et cetera, on that DR side, on the backup side. I haven't seen a huge impact just yet, but I'm waiting to, other than companies are utilizing the products more because of some uncertainty. But it's really, Chris, where I've seen it is more on the disaster recovery business continuity side versus like just a pure backup play. That could just be my own, my own world though, but that's where I've seen most of the impact land. And again, it's because of the restructuring of the billing platform in VMware that they're like, hey, we got to maybe attack this a little differently. How do we optimize their DR strategy as well? Because that's where I saw that's one of the landmines I saw trip that caused that 200-300% increase in billing.
Okay. And, I'll just kind of open this one last call for any additional questions. If you have any additional questions, you can either hand raise and we can unmute, or if you want to place those in the chat, any additional. So Brian asks, can we still use VMware on-prem? So I think the short answer is certainly yes. Understand that as far as that goes, they have end of life all those product SKUs. So certainly support and renewal would be difficult. However, the product's not gone. The usage capabilities of that product isn't gone. It would, same situation. If you're still running a 2003 server, you're not obviously going to get support updates, any of those things, but the product isn't going to cease to function as an on-premise product today.
Agreed. Of course, you can use it. Again, it comes down to, resources, alignment, and effort. If you haven't ever started to kind of go down, one of the best decision-making processes, the tools that I utilize when working with organizations is I put everything into an impact and effort scale. How much impact does it move to stay on-prem? How much effort will it take going forward? How much impact will it take to move it off? And how much effort does it take moving forward? And you can start to really kind of align, you get your team together, you go through the exercise, you plot everybody's opinion, and then you get a pretty clear picture of, an answer there, especially when you have multiple projects. It helps in stack ranking, which ones we're going to go to and take on first. But that's the way I look at everything. It's just the way I've been wired since I started utilizing that. And so if I'm looking at staying on-prem, I look at the impact and the effort it's going to have to my organization, and vice versa, in comparison to if we want to move it into a different cloud environment. Cost obviously becomes a big proponent of that. But I think the one thing I'll give, we point out is, whenever you're doing a cost evaluation, you also got to look at the soft costs around it, overhead, and what else is being held back because we have to go and do all of this, versus if we just move it over here and utilize that hybrid approach of collaborating with MSP, CSPs to do more and take some of that off. Can that help us get to these other projects that are going to have more bottom line value to our organization than messing around with, what hypervisor we want to use? So sometimes it just becomes as simple as, can I do more by doing it this way or less by doing it this way?
Any other questions from anybody today? Just kind of hang for a minute.
No, I just feel like I'll step off my soapbox that I just apparently stepped onto there. But I do feel pretty passionate about that part because it becomes a business alignment conversation as much as a technology conversation at certain points.
Give this another open minute. Any other questions?
Is really testing my ability to be comfortable with silence.
Well, I think if there are no other questions, certainly I want to thank everybody for their time today. If you have any additional questions about what we spoke about today, if you want to have a deeper conversation with myself, with Kobe, please talk with one of your technology advisor, with your technology advisor. We can help get that aligned, get that set up. If you want to talk about current workloads, how we can shift those, what the VMware landscape needs to look like for your infrastructure, more than happy to have those conversations. But if not, I'll give everybody 5 minutes back. I'm sure everybody on this call would appreciate that. And thank you all for your participation today.
Thanks, Chris and Kobe.
Appreciate you guys having me on. Anything I can do to help, just let me know. And I'll be jumping in next week as well, because I think that'll be a really fun and interesting conversation. We get to hear about the different programs that a lot of those suppliers have put together around this topic.
And thanks everybody for your attendance today.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thank
Have a good one.
Bye.
Good one.